Testing.
You're great start. You're listening to Film Club Extra, and for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to be talking about the DC Extended Universe. Hello, and welcome to Film Club Extra. My name is Dylan, and I'm joined here by a gang of DC enthusiasts, perhaps.
I'm Ian.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Simon.
Hello, everybody. So we're gathered here today to talk about the state of the DC Extended Universe, which is a bit of a mess, and there's been lots of news going on. And I thought we'd just kind of weave our way through the past of it, because if there's anything the internet needs, it's more white guys talking about comic book films. And so I think we'll jump straight in. So it's been a bit of a mess over the last few years, but this sort of all started out of sort of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy with The Man of Steel, which was originally supposed to be a Nolan Superman film, but he just ends up as sort of a producer on it and not really having much to do with it. And so we get The Man of Steel, and in comes Zack Snyder, and so is born the short-lived, much talked about Snyderverse. So I'm just wondering, especially with Man of Steel, is it a promising start for this series? I don't know whether maybe Matt looks like he's got something to say on this. Did we think when that was launched we were gonna get something amazing from it?
It's difficult. It's difficult to think in retrospect because I've been damaged by Zack Snyder, and I recognise that actually I quite liked bits of Zack. I liked Zack Snyder's Watchmen, and I quite liked Man of Steel. I liked certainly the beginning of Man of Steel. And the trailer, I quite liked. I liked the look of it. I am a fan of Nolan, and I liked The Dark Knight. So at the time, watching that kind of aesthetic carrying on into, albeit a less interesting character of Superman, I sort of welcomed it. Yeah.
Okay. And Simon, what about you? Were you in from the start?
Do you know what? I realised just earlier this week when we discussed doing this episode that I'd never watched Man of Steel properly. and I watched it, and I really, really enjoyed it. I have reservations about it, as I have reservations about the DC universe in general. But I thought in general it was, as to whether it's a good start to things that were moving on, I'm not sure. But as a standalone Superman movie in its own right, that isn't trying to be Christopher Reeve Superman, I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's sort of different enough from what came before. I'm wondering, Ian, whether you have any input on that movie.
I just think it's very difficult for someone of my age to be objective about Man of Steel because of the Christopher Reeve films and the impact they had on my childhood. I gave it as, an open a mind as I could, and my mind is pretty open, let's be honest.
But you're more of a Quest for Peace guy.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Nuclear Man all the way. There were a couple of casting decisions that I didn't necessarily get on with so much, but that's very much a factor of the DCEU. And I thought Man of Steel was a workmanlike, nay, competent start to what could have gone on to be a really good series.
Do you know there's a moment in Man of Steel where Superman goes to the center of that blast of energy that's about to terraform Earth, and he looks up, and for a moment he really looks like Christopher Reeve, and it's almost like that moment in Day of the Doctor where John Hurt looks up and he just looks like Christopher Eccleston, and then it disappears.
I really thought you were going to say looks like Christopher Reeve, and I'll be like,
different Christopher. But yeah, it was probably in my mind, but he did for a moment look like Christopher Reeve. I wondered if that was.
I think there's a key because something Simon said was it was a good film, so it was a good standalone film. But your question was it a good start? And I think with the Nolan films, Man of Steel was clearly along the lines of the Nolan films. But then where did you go after that? Because you can't just redo the Nolan films for the rest of the time. You have to sort of take a tonal shift at some point. Yeah. And that's what I think DC didn't do after Man of Steel. They just kept on, they just doubled down on the Man of Steel.
Yeah,
and then tried going down different alleyways randomly after it failed.
I think obviously they sort of saw what Marvel were doing and were like, we can fast forward this. We don't need to lay any of the groundwork. So you get, what's now known as the Snyderverse, because there's sort of two versions of DC. They're sort of pre-Justice League and post-Justice League. So after that, we get Batman versus Superman, The Dawn of Justice, Suicide Squad, and Wonder Woman. And that is sort of laying the groundwork for this universe that kind of appears but never really appears. But so your feeling, Matt, is that perhaps it just kind of was going nowhere with those films.
My feeling is that Zack Snyder was going nowhere with those films, because I think his aesthetic, his take was sort of Nolan-like, but with extra Zack Snyderness. But the non-Zack Snyder ones, I thought Suicide Squad was pretty unwatchable, but Wonder Woman was the sort of shining beacon of something that you could watch and enjoy, because it had humor. I mean, it's got to have, that's what they looked at Marvel. Yeah, you're right. I think they decided they could skip all of these boring this boring preparation, but they also skipped a lot of the humor as well, which makes Marvel distinctive.
Do you know what's interesting? If I was going to criticize Man of Steel of anything, it was, you use that phrase fast forward, Dylan, and it felt like bringing the Kryptonians back and General Zod within the same movie that you're introducing Superman. It was almost like you'd used up your bag of tricks very, very quickly. So, yet another sign that they couldn't move on from it, because they'd already kind of, and I know that's what occurred to me. Obviously, Superman 1, Superman 2 filmed together, but equally two movies. So you wait until the second movie to have Superman go up against some other Kryptonians.
Yeah, so Ian, were you engaged with any of these films? Did you enjoy watching Batman ving Superman and things like that?
I mean, yeah, my main reason for watching Man of Steel was eventually the promise of seeing Batman ving Superman. And like Matt, but probably more strongly than Matt, I'm really a massive Christopher Nolan Batman fan. And I was really curious to see what they would do next with the character of Batman that would still be interesting or be worth doing that soon after Christian Bale. I didn't enjoy it, and it wasn't so much Affleck as it was casting Jeremy Irons as Alfred. I mean, watching Jeremy Irons brings me out in I get a rash all down here, and there's hives and there's sickness. And it's a fairly preposterous premise. You're Batman, you can go up against Superman if you wear this enormous metal costume. Superman fundamentally for me just doesn't work in films with other superheroes, because his powers so outweigh everyone else that you've got no real narrative room to maneuver. So I gave it a try. I found it wanting. And then, of course, you've got that ending where it's yet another big CGI monster tearing up whatever, New York again or whatever. And I was watching it and my eyes were just crying for freedom and release and the sweet release of death.
Well, I think you get, I think this is a problem with those early Snyderverse movies, is that some of them start off quite promising, but both Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman and Batman v Superman, there's just sort of this nameless, faceless CGI entity that is the final third of the film. And any decent work, like character work and things like that have been done previously, like especially with Wonder Woman, I would say, you're just by the final act, you're just like, oh, so it's this again.
It feels like Snyder's stuck in the late 90s. Remember, I seem to remember the first film I was disappointed by the fact it ended with a CGI blob was Schwarzenegger's End of Days, which was this kind of like pre-millennial anxiety kind of Satanist cult exorcist with Uzi 9mm.
Yeah.
And then it just ends with this CGI blob. And I know that Marvel have done their share of that, but I think you're right. The Snyderverse is kind of is sort of obsessed with it. However, James Gunn is also obsessed with it, and I think he manages to, if it's done well with personality and character or humor, again.
Yeah. I mean, Marvel's blobs tend to be slightly more charismatic, I guess, is the takeaway there. But all roads lead to Justice League, and obviously, if you're a fan of DC Comics, or even if you're just invested in the DCEU or the superhero genre in general, everybody's very excited for this team up. And we start to hear these rumblings behind the scenes of things going wrong. We've already had that with the Suicide Squad, a little bit of reshoots and recuts, and David Ayer not getting the final edit and stuff like that. But obviously, we get Zack Snyder's Justice League, and then all of a sudden, it's sort of Joss Whedon's Justice League. Do we think audiences and indeed the studio were sort of losing faith in the vision as set out by Snyder? I don't know whether you've got some input on that, Simon.
Jumping ahead to the Snyder cut of Justice League, I was kind of impressed with how somebody can be that committed to a film's own self-importance. But I mean that as a genuine compliment, that, you know, if you're going to go all in, then go all in, and he does in the Snyder cut. And in that respect, I found it quite entertaining. But rewinding to the Joss Whedon version, it doesn't meld in, say, for instance, the same way as a Solo movie melds between. I've gone completely blank now on the original directors. And yeah, anyway, my brain's not working with names. Anyway, our listeners are used to my brain not working with names. But you take my point that yes, it's a halfway house. And there are some, if you like Joss Whedon films, there are some very Joss Whedon moments in Justice League. But it's not, you know, that inconsistency sticks out like a sore thumb. So yes, you're absolutely right. They were losing faith in where it was going, and yeah.
And of course, audiences sort of lost faith there, because I think it did like 300 million, something like that, worldwide, which is both a lot of money and no money at all when you've sunk that amount of money into a film. And it kind of bombs, and we then start to get all these stories like, you know, the whole Joss Whedon thing, Ray Fisher being unhappy with how it was treated, all the cast saying they were having a horrible time. And so these cracks are really starting to show. So they're like, we're going to shake things up. We're going to shake up the DC universe. We're going to make all these new films. And all of a sudden, all of these stars, but pretty much Cavill and Affleck are sort of kicked to the curb at this point, although, you know, we'll come to them a little bit later. I guess, I mean, do we think it was the right decision were Cavill and Affleck the problem? Were they the people we should have got rid of?
I think they absolutely were. And I don't mean to be incredibly rude about either of them, but Justice League really underlined you've got these kind of 5 superheroes, and none of them really had any charisma. You know, like, you care about Tony Stark, you care about Bruce Banner, but it's very hard to get emotionally bothered about Affleck or Cavill or Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman or Jason Momoa. They're just, you know, they're great at doing what they're doing, but I found I just didn't care.
There's an elephant in the room. None of us are mentioning Shazam, which for me is the best DC modern movie.
Oh, it's brilliant. Shazam is brilliant, and I think it sort of stands apart from it all because it's a big, fun family film, essentially. And that comes just after Justice League, I think, a little bit. And I mean, the Shazam verse hasn't really taken off, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah. But you obviously get that moment at the end where Superman appears, but we don't see the face because they're unsure of who Superman's going to be. So,
sorry, I've jumped ahead.
No. They're all the same thing, and we're only supposed to be skimming over these ones anyway. But
and the Superman cameo at the end is something that they repeat later on, but unfortunately more explicitly for embarrassing purposes. I push back slightly against Ian's. It's the actor's fault that they don't have charisma. I think that's still to do with the script, and it's to do with the tone. I don't think there's a lot of charisma to be had when the dialogue is mostly two actors suddenly realizing that their mothers share the same name, and that kind of dead kind of exchange of dialogue right at a critical moment.
That is fair and true. There is only so much heavy lifting you can do.
And I would say that Christopher Nolan had the same, and I am a massive fan of Christopher Nolan, but he has the same problem slightly with even The Dark Knight, which is one of the great films of the last decade. But at the same time, he can sort of Robert Holmes it, because he has got a vision, and I don't think Zack Snyder has a coherent vision. I think he has a sense of tone that he sticks to doggedly, but I don't think he's a visionary director. I don't think I don't think he's all over the script. I don't think he's all over the story. I mean, I've tried to watch his cut of Justice League, and I find it very difficult to get past the first book or the first section, because I find it so leaden. And I'm speaking as somebody who's watched a 7 or 8 hour Hungarian film.
Yeah, but Satan Tango was amazing.
Satan Tango is amazing, yeah. But nothing happens. But I happily watched it. But just Zack Snyder's Justice League, I actually found myself losing interest in flagging.
I mean, I don't know how much of an appetite there ever is for a 4-hour movie, especially like one that's that intense. I mean, I think it's a more coherent movie, that cut, but I can see why, whether you're Zack Snyder or Joss Whedon or anybody else, how turning that into a 2.5 hour sort of action-packed, family-friendly blockbuster might be an issue.
Yeah, and Shazam, I really liked at the cinema, but I haven't been driven to watch it since. It felt to me really fun, but potentially disposable. But refreshing after trying to watch Justice League. It did feel refreshing that you had something that was actually family friendly, fun, light.
So once they've got rid of their Batman and their Superman, and they're trying to re-gear everything, we get Shazam, as we said. We get Aquaman, which is a huge hit, a massive hit. It makes over $1 billion, which I don't think anybody was expecting. I remember quite enjoying Aquaman at the cinema because it was such a massive, fun film. But the caveat to that is I had been in the pub for about 3 hours before that, and I've never watched it since. So who knows? And we get Birds of Prey, we get Wonder Woman 1984, and the Suicide Squad essentially, and those are sort of brings us up to date, with one exception we'll come to. Were any of those films, I guess we talked about Shazam, were any of those films like, okay, I can see a new direction that DC are going to take, and this is really exciting, or was it just more of the same?
The Suicide Squad, I think, is the first film, obviously because it's a James Gunn film. That's the film where you can see a potential new direction, which is pretty much Guardians of the Galaxy, just with DC characters. I struggled with it. I still haven't managed to get through Aquaman. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't watching it on the big screen. I really lost the plot. I really lost the plot with Aquaman. It made me so angry. And I was just sat there on my own in the living room trying to watch Aquaman. It made me so angry trying to watch it.
So Matt hates it.
I don't know why. I think it's just the CGI. I think it's just the sort of that kind of. But then Doctor Strange, and I keep on going back to Marvel films, but it's an obvious comparison. But Doctor Strange was slipped into this kind of CGI hit after hit of weird environments, and I quite like that. I didn't find that kind of headachy in the same way, and I don't know why.
If you think about a film like, who's watched Miracle Man?
I've not seen Miracle Man.
Is it Miracle Man? Am I getting mixed up? It's the film where you've got one of the characters, the shovel,
Mystery Men.
Mystery Man.
I thought you were talking about Condor Man.
It's a great film.
Mystery Men, which manages without very much CGI, because there was very little CGI at the time. It has the tone of a DC movie, or what could be a DC movie, where it doesn't take itself that seriously, because these characters are ridiculous. You know, I've always had this problem, and like I say, the listeners know me well enough that I've always said that's what's always kept me keeping DC at arm's length as opposed to Marvel, because Marvel, as Matt says, you get these human connections, you know, where these characters behave like normal people as much as they can when they're not turning into green monsters. And DC, I used to love when I was a kid. You know, I bought as many DC comics as I did Marvel comics, but they were different in as much as they were pure escapism, and everything was very brightly coloured and just a bit odd and strange. And I wasn't quite sure what the relationship was between all of the characters. And to put some of that on the screen, as they did with Christopher Reeve and films like Mystery Men, sorry. I don't know. It always seems to miss the dartboard for me. But then I haven't read a lot of DC in the last, you know, sort of decade or so. So it's quite possible that, you know, I'm talking about an age gone by of DC comics. I don't know.
It's not like us to talk about an age gone by.
So we get those films, and there's also a lot of other fallout. There's this Flash movie which still hasn't come out, but starring Ezra Miller as the Flash, and this is still at this point sort of touted as the next big film that's going to sort of reset the universe. We're open to the multiverse, and it was announced after the second episode of the Flash TV show was broadcast in about 2014, 2015, something like that. And as of right now, it still hasn't come out, and we've had one very small trailer for it. And Ian, have you got a point?
Was this one of the 3 or 4 films we were promised where Michael Keaton was going to come back?
Well, this is this thing of, they said they were bringing in back Michael Keaton's Batman, and he's gonna play a sort of Nick Fury character in the DC universe, and it's going to sort of phase out the Affleck Batman who'll be in there. Now, from what I understand, the Flash is still coming out, and Michael Keaton's Batman will be in it, but how big the role now is, we don't know. There was, for the next Aquaman film, Michael Keaton filmed some scenes, and then they showed it to audiences who did a test screening, and they were like, oh, why is Michael Keaton there? That's silly. So they re-recorded the scenes with Ben Affleck, but obviously no one's seen The Flash, so why would you do that? Then they commissioned Batgirl for HBO Max, which gets written off for tax purposes, essentially, because by all reports it wasn't very good. It was like an episode of the Arrowverse, but it cost $90 million. Michael Keaton's in that. There's a Batman Beyond film starring, which is heavily rumoured, starring Michael Keaton, which got cancelled in the whole James Gunn thing. So we've got this.
But Michael Keaton appears at the end of Morbius for no logical reason. So maybe it's Michael Keaton's fault. He keeps turning up in these films.
Are we blaming Michael Keaton for this?
Michael Keaton can do no wrong, especially not as Batman.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it.
I mean, the Flash. It strikes me that everybody involved in the making of the Flash is doing their best to get it cancelled and deleted, because the Flash, most of the main actors are pretty unproblematic, apart from one, and he's the only one that currently that still seems to be making films at DC, apart from Jason Momoa, possibly. So Ezra Miller. And it's just a disaster. It's a disaster.
And it feels to me like the treatment of all of their cast seems pretty shoddy. And yet, as you say, Ezra Miller's still there, because for some reason the film keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And now this new version of The Flash could well be a bit of a reboot version, but not in the way it was intended to be. So it feels like that it's going to be the get out clause of the universe. But I guess this sort of brings us up to date to the most recent film, which is Black Adam. Now, I've not seen Black Adam because I really don't care about Black Adam. Has anybody here seen it?
Yes, I've seen Black Adam,
and you loved it.
Him.
Do you mind spoilers? Does
No,
anyone
no, spoil away.
Does anyone? So Henry Cavill turns up in a post credit sting at the end, just before news of him being sacked was released. So it's suddenly the most. I didn't mind Black Adam. I didn't think The Rock was very good. I'm quite a big fan of The Rock, and I like him in the Jumanji films, and I like the Skyscraper movie, and I like the ridiculous films that he does. I even like the Welcome to the Jungle film with Jack Whitehall. I quite like that. I thought he was oddly miscast in Black Adam because it's such a dour character, and so he's really had to restrain. I mean, he has a sort of a one-note personality, and he's basically had to turn that note off. And what's the point? He's basically just a solid wall of muscle without this kind of one note of his personality in there. But it was fine. It did some interesting things. I'm pretty sure it was racist in parts, but I'm gonna have to watch it a few more times to sort of try and work it out. It didn't feel. What amused me most about Black Adam was Dwayne Johnson's sort of promotion of it, which was sort of very optimistically calling it the future of the DC universe, and this is the film that shapes the DC universe. This is really going to make the DC universe. And it's a bit like, I don't know, Tom Cruise promoting The Mummy as the film that really makes the universal move. This is the film that really shakes the universe and it just collapses. And so you could tell that I didn't think it did too badly, but it obviously wasn't going to sort of do an Iron Man for the DC universe. It obviously wasn't the direction the DC universe was planning on going.
I know, obviously, you're the only one that's seen it, but did it, Ian or Simon, did any of you look at that and think this is going to reinvigorate the DC universe, or was it just Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson that seemed to think this?
It's, I mean, the marketing and advertising left me cold, so I figured I was probably an outlier in terms of that particular fandom anyway. But no, there was nothing about it that seemed to me to have any kind of real energy towards the future.
What it feels like is DC are trying to do these things that Marvel have done, but they're trying to. They're trying in the case of the Flash, they're trying to run before they can walk.
They're trying to jump in at the Avengers phase without the build, without putting in the groundwork.
They're throwing in
care about characters,
Crisis on Infinite Earths, and all that stuff. All these different parallel Earths. It's like, well, we've not got to know one Earth yet.
Yeah, I don't give a damn.
I mean, it was partly Dwayne. I think it's partly Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne Johnson basically was promoting this film like a personal trainer at a gym, who's telling you you've got one more rep of a bench press to go, even as the bar's slowly crushing your windpipe. And he's just trying to get you just to lift it that little bit higher. There was desperation in that promotion, and there's that feeling of desperation in the promotion. But DC this company knows that it hasn't got the right film, and hasn't had the right film since maybe Shazam, maybe even Wonder Woman. It knows that there are flaws in its whole system, that it's not unified. It's not this sort of happy company like Marvel. It doesn't have a Kevin Feige.
Well, it didn't until just after, as much as everybody seemed to think Dwayne Johnson was somehow going to be the creative lead as like a producer or something in the DC universe, he quickly unfollowed the Black Adam account on Twitter when his film didn't do so well. But he clung on for a few weeks. And then it's announced that James Gunn is taking over. It's James Gunn and Peter Safran, is it? I did write the name down, but I can't remember it. Pete. James Gunn's mate's Pete. And we're all very excited. James Gunn's taking over the universe. And then within the space of about a week, everything just sort of starts to topple. So first of all, Henry Cavill, he's back, and then he's not back. Now everybody's like, oh, he quit The Witcher to do it. I don't think he quit The Witcher to do Superman. That would imply that he was going to film a Superman film next week that suddenly got pulled, and he's probably going to spend the next 2 years filming Superman. He quit The Witcher because he's a Hollywood star who doesn't want to do a television show for whatever he's getting paid.
But isn't he now doing the doing a TV show for Amazon based on Warhammer.
Oh, is he?
And he
I
announced
think
it was like this massive passion project. Like a
isn't he
guy who looks
controlling
like
it?
that plays Warhammer.
he's producing. He's like heavily creative input. So maybe that's his Hollywood superpower coming to the fore.
I thought he was just waiting to be asked to play Captain Britain. That's what
Captain
Captain
Britain.
Scarlet.
He'd be really good at Captain Britain.
he would.
Sorry.
Well, maybe that'll happen, but
Maybe that's the answer to talk about the DC universe, is just to start talking about Marvel universe and get enthusiastic.
So Cavill's gone. Affleck is gone again, even though he filmed a bit for. I don't know how much of Affleck we'll see. I know at some point he's in the Flash movie, and that was supposed to be his swan song. We've still got Matt Reeves somewhere over there making a Batman film, so it's probably a good thing that we're only going to have one Batman in the world. I don't know whether there's...
And we've still got a second Joker movie floating around as well.
Yeah.
So it's this weird sort of multiverse of slightly auteur directors just saying, excuse me, bleep this, JR, fuck this shit, and going off and just doing their own thing.
Yeah.
Away from the main DC, like chaotic DC stuff that's going on.
Exactly. Gal Gadot's gone, and we're left with this James Gunn and Peter Safran slate of new movies. Do we think a clean slate is a good idea? Is that what they needed? Simon's nodding enthusiastically.
Yes. Simple answer. I just think it's all kind of... It's not tainted. That sounds a bit wrong, but... I mean, it's a shame because there are notable performances. Who's it who plays Harley Quinn?
Margot Robbie.
Margot Robbie is great.
They haven't said she's gone, though, have they? And
no.
James Gunn did make The Suicide Squad.
But it kind of feels like they should start from scratch. Let The Suicide Squad be what it is. And then if he's going to reboot the universe and start things in his own way, then maybe it should be all completely fresh, so there's no perceived crossover.
Is there a case to be made that obviously DC have to be making films because they're a company that makes films and a few television series, but they have to keep on making films, so it's like a factory, it's like a production line, but all they're making is... And they keep on having to restart because they reach a creative dead end and a restart. If they had the potential to take like 5 years of no DC films, then I think a reboot, a restart would be worthwhile, because you have the Nolan movies and that the break from the the Joel Schumacher movies. Before that there was a break, so there hasn't really been a Batman Superman gap yet, or maybe there has. It's just been sort of filled with Batman-y, Superman-y kind of...
It has, and we're not even, and for the sake of the listeners and the runtime of this podcast, we're not even talking about the stuff that's being done on TV as well, because there's I think there's about 15 Supermen on every channel now. But
for me, restart it and animate all of it, and that's how the DC universe works.
I say do it as telesnaps.
Right. I'm aware that I sound a bit like one of those present company, except one of those annoying Doctor Who fans who occasionally says, "Oh, they should take Doctor Who off the air for 20 years because it's much better when it has a break." But I genuinely think with DC, that every film they release is almost like them trying a fresh start, and it just becomes a little bit desperate. Having one figure like James Gunn, I think that's promising. But it's kind of Marvel sloppy seconds in a way that I really like Guardians of the Galaxy, but even Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I was starting to... James Gunness was starting to wear on me.
Yeah.
And I haven't got through the Peacemaker, the TV series he did.
Oh, you see, I love that.
I liked it in like 10-minute chunks, but to try and blitz all 12 episodes in a kind of a box set blitz, I just couldn't do it. It just gave me a headache.
Well, I mean, it was the most sort of coherent bit of DC I'd seen probably since Shazam.
Well,
But,
yes. Yeah.
I guess my issue here with this fresh start is that it's not a fresh start, though, is it? Because they've still got 4 films to come out. So those 4 films are Shazam, Fury of the Gods, The Flash, which will be out at some point, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and the most interesting one here being Blue Beetle, which apparently will play a part in the new universe despite being commissioned before Gunn got his hands on it. So I wonder, can James Gunn outlast these 4 films? Ian, do you think he's going to be able to ride it out before getting kicked off for these failures?
God, I don't know. I think if you sat him in a room and you said, right, we don't want a peep out of you for 3 years, we want a 50-page treatment for the first 10 films in our brilliant, all singing, all dancing new DC universe, and then he's got enough kind of plausible deniability, I believe it's called, if these 4 films stink to high heaven, he can come out and say, no, here we go. But how many times can you reboot a turd, as I believe Shakespearean expression goes? Well, I don't know what Blue Beetle is. What's Blue Beetle?
I've just Wikipedia'd it. I've never heard of it. I just Wikipedia'd it. It sounds awful.
But, am I right in thinking it's a Hispanic character?
It's an Hispanic actor.
Okay.
So the actor's name is definitely Hispanic, Mexican, I think. The character's name is Jamie Reese. So, but there are Hispanic names in the cast, so it does seem to have, like, yes, you're right, it does have a sort of an Hispanic edge to it.
That already does sound more interesting than most other films they've done in the last 12 years. So I'm here for that one. I'm here for The Flash, if only for Mr. Keaton, as we've previously mentioned. But I don't think you can tie these together after the fact. I mean, once they've been written, you can't then retrofit it into your new version of the universe. So
it is like Chris Chibnall continuing to write after Russell T Davies takes over, and then Chris Chibnall sort of releases his final season just as David Tennant's coming back at the same time.
Yeah.
And at least, and this analogy doesn't work, but at least Russell T Davies gets a kind of a 2-year break to sort of retool the series, and he reverts to David Tennant as kind of filler in between that he knows will be successful. So maybe they should bring Christian Bale back.
Well,
maybe they should just do another Dark Knight or Michael Keaton. Yeah,
because there's been a lot of talk of kind of exec interference and shareholders, and DC HBO got sold and AOL owned some of it at some point and all this stuff. And I think quite famously, or infamously perhaps, the guys that got the sack for Justice League, the execs that got booted off the DC franchise, weren't the people that made or commissioned Justice League. It just happened to fail on their watch. So which kind of doesn't fill me with...
I mean, we skirted over Batgirl.
Yeah.
But actually, reportedly, it's not very good. But by refusing, obviously, so now as I understand it, because it's a tax write-off, they can never release it, or they can't release it. Nobody can see it, because then it becomes a creative object. At the moment, it's just product in digital form. But that kind of tantalizing not being able to see it basically turns it into the Citizen Kane of superhero movies. I mean, I'm desperate to see Batgirl. I know I'll be horribly disappointed, but we're not allowed to see it, and I want to see it. It's a voluntary lost film.
Does it make it the DC equivalent of Marvel's Roger Corman's Fantastic Four movie?
Yeah,
it's in essence.
Yeah. It'll leak one day. These things always do. I don't know. I suppose though, because I remember the director said they went to try and save some of the stuff off the server and it had already gone. But at least Roger Corman's one, the tapes were floating around for years and years and years because you edited physically back in the day.
Yeah.
So, but I'm sure somebody somewhere will leak it, and I guess it's a case of it. If it was to one day be released as this great lost movie that would probably not be very good, it then becomes a taxable asset again, and all the tax that because they've written their cost. This is kind of a sidestep, but a lot of films are made due to tax write-offs. In fact, there's quite an infamous industry company based up in Yorkshire who very rarely release films, but make about 6 or 7 of them a year, and they're just embezzling money for people. But that's that's another story. There's a lot of great tax benefits for investing in films, or indeed writing them off, if you're the sort of person that has a big tax bill and is very rich. So somebody like Warner Brothers or AOL or HBO or whoever was in charge.
Are you suggesting that at some point in the future we're going to see Donald Trump's Star Wars, Star Wars episode 12?
We're going to see it cancelled after it's been shot. Yeah, 100%. So we've arrived at this point where James Gunn says he knows what the next 10 years looks like, and everybody's very excited. We've heard a bit from you, Matt. Simon, do you think Gunn is the right choice?
I think he's as good as anyone, if I'm honest. It's whether his idiosyncrasies become the norm, and I think that's your worry, isn't it, Matt? That a James Gunn film is a James Gunn film, and are they all going to be like that? But
I mean, he does horror very well. Sorry, I'm talking again. He does. So Brightburn, I disliked, but it wasn't obviously a James Gunn film. It was a superhero. It was what if Superman was born a horrible, like, gory killer, and the effects of that. So he does have like different tones.
I mean, the thing is whether he has the wisdom. I always say about the Marvel universe that what they're doing is you've got this rich back history of Marvel comics from the 1940s onwards, 1930s, 1940s onwards, and they take the best bits and they think, right, where can that can all fit in? Yes, we can contract time and we can tell this story in a much more concise way, but leave enough space that we can still do more with the characters, have proper arcs. And I was about to say, it's not that hard. No, it is quite hard. But if you're going to rip off, if you're going to, emulate what Marvel have done, then that's the best thing to do, because you've got an even greater history of DC Comics with all these characters and all these amazing stories that don't seem to be, they're not doing that. They're not looking, what worked? Oh yeah, let's use that. There just seems to be this obsession with establishing how incredibly dark and serious, and we know that Superman went around with some red trunks on for God knows how many years, but we're going to make him dead serious and take the trunks off him, and everyone's going to love it because it's all so serious. And all people really want is to be entertained and to care about the characters.
Yeah,
and that's not hard, is it? Well, it's hard. It's hard, but you know what I mean. It's as a brief. It's.
I do think that James Gunn has the right sort of lightness of touch. He makes funny, exciting. He can do action quite well. And as I said, I really enjoyed Peacemaker. I was less enamored with the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special or holiday special that happened this year. And as his most recent bit of work, I'm a bit like, I hope we don't get any more of that. Ian, are you a Gunn man?
I like the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. That's about as far as I went with it. And I agree with Simon in that he's as good a choice as any, but the best person's probably someone out there who isn't even working in film or comics. We'll never get the.
I wonder, whoever they choose, and this is about the last time I talk, whoever they choose, I think they're facing a problem, because I think Simon's right that the obvious thing is to try and emulate Marvel, but the whole thing that Marvel did was they started their whole cycle of films with 3 or 4 characters who hadn't really had films before. So Iron Man, Thor, even Captain America, they were all sort of old characters but fresh cinematic faces. and DC just keeps cycling back to Superman and Batman, and they're giving us a new iteration of Superman, a new iteration of Batman, and I don't think you can be fresh and do that. You can find new directions for them, but for some reason each iteration kind of scars the next one.
Yeah, I also think I mean, obviously DC are looking for their Kevin Feige, but Kevin Feige in himself is a bit of an anomaly. How many other executive producers that can people, the general public, not just nerds on the internet like us, actually name? And the next go-to one, people would say, probably be Harvey Weinstein, and they know him for very different reasons. So Marvel kind of stumbled on gold with this guy who's got an overview and knows how to work this universe. And I mean, like you say, he James Gunn is sort of as good a choice as any. I guess we're getting to the point of wrapping things up, but I have a couple more things I want to discuss. He's rebooting this universe. We might get more Jason Momoa playing Lobo. We might get this sort of year 2 Superman, sort of not young but not old. What do we think is the biggest loss from what we previously had or were going to get? And is there anything we're particularly looking forward to? Who looks like they've got the best answer here? Matt's always got something to say. So
I think I'm agreeing. I'm going to agree with what Ian's about to say, which is probably Michael Keaton. I mean, I think the possibility of Michael Keaton. I think Michael Keaton, as Ian suggested, is potentially the David Tennant of DC, and the possibility of having this kind of nostalgic kick in there could be the palate cleanser, and I'm mixing metaphors, palate cleanser that kind of gets you beyond this kind of stale Batman cycle. So yeah, the fact that he might be in it, but he's sort of now fractured and half in it.
Yeah, he for me would have been the draw that would have got me to go back and watch yet another cinematic iteration of the Batman story. But an exciting bit of casting is all it would take to make even the most boring superhero, let's call him Superman, suddenly interesting again. So who knows?
And Patty Jenkins as well.
Yeah.
Is it Patty Jenkins,
yes,
the director? So that first Wonder Woman film was really sort of that Wonder Woman film was a really kind of fresh thing that went on, and it was a female director, a woman director of a DC film, and obviously she's now she's going to do Star Wars, I think, which is great.
She's doing the Star Wars Top Gun movie, isn't she?
Yeah, which is fantastic. But I think she deserved another take at Wonder Woman that wasn't screwed by COVID.
Yeah. Simon, are you waving the Keaton flag too?
No, because that time's gone. That is purely nostalgia.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything to be gained from coming back to Michael Keaton unless you're going to, do some, an adaptation of, the comic, The Dark Knight. Or The Dark Knight Returns, sorry.
I'd go and see that. I'd be first in the queue.
Yeah, I'd go and see that.
There is an animation of it, isn't there? Yeah, there's an animation of it.
That's not real cinema.
That's DC when it works at its best. The old Batman animated series was just incredible, stylized, and great stories and great voice cast. What I'd really like to see and never happen is a Legion of Superheroes movie that goes from scratch and we have Legion of Superheroes fighting during World War II. That's what I'd like to see, but it won't happen.
No, I mean, you never know, because they've still got the Matt Reeves world that seems to be separate. James Gunn said they won't interlink with that, so I mean, you never know, but it sounds like a very expensive movie.
Yeah, but I think Matt nailed something down, which is that really the way of restarting is doing exactly what he said, which is to pick characters who aren't necessarily that well known. Even Lobo. I know Lobo is really well known amongst comic fans, but amongst the general public, because what they're missing is that with trying to hit these stories that are supposed, like Crisis of Infinite Earths, the general public don't care.
No.
Because they've not been given a chance to care.
Yeah.
So to start afresh with some lesser known characters and then do exactly what Marvel did with Spider-Man, which is to bring him in later on. I know that wasn't on purpose because Sony were holding on to him, but to do the same thing where you establish this lovely group of characters that people only care about as movies, and then suddenly bring in Superman and Batman, and suddenly they've got exactly that momentum they've been looking for to get bums on seats in cinemas.
Yeah, I'm strangely in a sort of car crash way, and I know that this loss has already happened, but the Snyderverse really interests me of where those Justice League movies may have gone and would have gone. I don't know whether they would have been any good, but there was such a promise of a bigger tale there that you got even more of, especially with all those sort of flash forwards and things like that to this apocalypse in the Snyder films, that I would have loved to have seen that wrapped up, even though I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it. So I'll probably just say Michael Keaton.
Like George Lucas's 789.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of about it. Unless there's anybody is there anything we're looking forward to? Is it too early to tell with the James Gunnverse or the DC Universe, as it's now going to be called? They've dropped the extended because it's a reboot.
I'm looking forward to the second Joker film. I've completely called on the first Joker film, and I find it unwatchable. But the second Joker film is going to be a musical, and there's something about that really appeals to me.
How wonderful!
It's off topic, I guess, but it's not really, is it? I mean, how do these films? Can we talk about the ridiculousness of there being a Ben Affleck Batman? There's a TV series Batman as well, played by somebody else.
Well, there's the Gotham Batman who by the end of it, I watched the first season, but there's only so many hours in the day to watch toddler Batman running around. But by the end of it, he is like in his early 20s and puts on the cape and yes,
and there's also a Flash Batman. There's a second Batman somewhere, or is that a Superman? There's a Batman in the Joker movie as well, technically, sort of. But how many? There are like 6 or 7 Bruce Waynes just floating around all at the same time.
Yeah, we've not even mentioned Robert Pattinson's Batman, which I preferred to the Christopher Nolan's. Sorry.
I was Matt. I need to rewatch it.
Just to touch on that briefly, I enjoyed it, but I thought its most successful elements was the newer stuff, and anything that had been in the Nolan films, like the sort of gang stuff and Catwoman and things like that. I just felt a little bit like I've seen these done really well in the last decade, but there was enough there to make me go, I'm invested. You've got me there for the next film. But then, truthfully, I'd go and watch any Batman film, wouldn't I?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've made the point that we made maybe 10-15 minutes ago, that there have been so many Batman and Superman films now that, for the love of God, let's just have 5 years off. And then I'd be excited by anything. They could cast Jeremy Irons as Superman, and I might go and see it. I wouldn't, but I might.
Surely he could do Irons Man.
Oh, very good.
Oh, is that really going to be the end of this podcast?
I have one more question for you all, and we'll try and keep it brief. Are we starting to see the decline of the sort of superhero film? I don't know, people haven't loved the most recent Marvel films so much. Perhaps they're doing very well, but not quite as well. DC has gone stale and had its ups and downs. Do we think that we're starting to see that decline a little bit?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because it seems to be picking up speed on the TV side of things. With the success of She-Hulk. She-Hulk has been huge, as far as I can tell. Certainly among
8 foot.
Yeah, no. At work, where most of the people I work with are female, and 9 out of 10 people think She-Hulk was the best thing ever on TV last year. So,
I think a lot of it probably does come down to the last couple of Marvel superhero films haven't had Iron Man in them. People like Robert Downey Jr. They like Mark Ruffalo. You know, are people emotionally engaged with the Eternals or whoever's in the next DC film? Do they care about Henry Cavill in the same way? I don't know. I think there's a lot to be said for a good bit of casting.
It's also Marvel cinematically, as you said, they're basically trying to restart the engine after Endgame and Infinity War, or Infinity War and Endgame. That was such a big moment and such a phenomenally successful pair of films. And then they have to go small again with Black Widow. At the same time, COVID hits, so it's difficult to quantify the success of films. And so I think they probably, as Simon says, they've quite wisely focused more on the television series and building this kind of roster of television series. But that is always going to feel like it's gone more Loki with Loki. But having said that, I rewatched Hawkeye this Christmas, and I'll probably rewatch Hawkeye next Christmas as well, because that's actually my favorite Marvel TV series. I thought it was so good, and I want to see more Haley Steinfeld. Haley Stein. No, I'm trying
Don't
to
ask me about names.
No.
Leave him out there to struggle, and then we'll cut it here.
The new Hawkeye, who was in True Grit and another thing. I'm really looking forward to seeing her more.
I think the conclusion we've come to here is that everybody prefers Marvel, and there's no point in talking about DC anymore. But maybe we'll reconvene here once the Flash movie's been out and talk about what a fantastic movie it was. So I think that about wraps it up for the DCEU, as it's now known. So this has been Film Club Extra. I've been Dylan.
I've been Ian.
I was Matt.
And I was Simon.